It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is quite possibly the greatest American sitcom ever written. The reason I say this is because it goes against every cliché and rule that has become associated with that genre. It's often been said that the difference between British and American comedy is that the British comedies tend to focus on people who are losers and naturally dislikable, Basil Fawlty, Alan Partridge, or Richie and Eddie from Bottom. Whereas in American sitcoms, they tend to have happy protagonists, characters who may be flawed, but are still, despite this, very lovable and easily relatable. It's Always Sunny flips this entire trope on its head and instead decides to focus on a group of people who between them and individually represent the worst aspects of human nature. They never learn, they never grow, they never change, and no matter how hard they try to change things, they always fail and end up right back where they started. This is why the show can push the envelope and boundaries of taste and decency as far as it does, and seemingly get away with it, because the characters never win, and are ultimately destroying themselves. But Sunny isn't shocking for shocking's sake. Everything the characters do has purpose and meaning. Aside from being very funny, one of its strengths is how much detail is paid to the writing and the development of the characters. Out of the 5 main characters, possibly the most fascinating and curious is Dennis Reynolds. When the show started, Dennis came across as nothing more than an arrogant, self-absorbed narcissist who simply believed he was God's gift to humankind. But as the show progresses, he gradually appears to become more and more dark and sinister. This is why the most popular It's Always Sunny related fan theory is that Dennis Reynolds is a serial killer. Simply type the words Dennis Reynolds is a serial killer into Google and you'll find pages upon pages of links to blogs, forums and YouTube videos talking about this theory. Now, I understand that fan theories are ultimately just a bit of fun and a way for us as fans to connect and interpret our favourite films and TV shows. Part of the fun is that none of these can ever or will ever be confirmed to be true or made canon. But in this case, I beg to differ. For me, a good fan theory is one that is unique and original. It must be one that, when read, gives you a whole new perspective on the show or film that you've never considered before, whilst at the same time it must be completely and utterly plausible. The theory that Dennis is a serial killer is neither unique nor original. In fact, in the context of It's Always Sunny fan theories, it's the equivalent of when some noob tries to guess what the twist of a film is and says, oh, they must all be dead at the end. Dennis being a serial killer is simply too obvious and too easy a conclusion to draw for it to be considered a fan theory. But I don't mean this to sound disrespectful to those who have proposed or argued it. There's a reason this is such a widely believed theory. It's because the writers of the show want you to think that. It's an idea that has been deliberately put in your head and then played with and exacerbated. However, as I'm about to explain, it's an idea that actually doesn't make much sense. So much in the way that Sunny has been described as the anti-sitcom, I guess you could say that this is my attempt at an anti-fan theory. My name's Dick Coughlin, and here's why Dennis Reynolds is not a serial killer. The term serial killer is defined by the FBI as someone who commits at least 3 murders over the course of a month with, quote, an emotional cooling off period in between. The most popular perception and understanding of what a serial killer is one generally associated with white single men in their 30s, such as Dennis, who are always found to be psychopaths, or to give it its medical term, psychopathic personality disorder. Psychopaths, as far as we know, are people who are born with an inability to feel any emotions. However, they are still able to understand what emotions are and how they work. Whilst not all psychopaths are serial killers and vice versa, for the purposes of this video I'll be using a definition that is based on the most commonly held perceptions of what a serial killer is, because that is the one that the show writers and the viewers are using. Let's start with some simple problems. Serial killers are loners. There are two reasons for this. The first one is purely practical. It makes the act of killing and disposing of people a lot easier. The second reason is simply because psychopaths are, by their very nature, not the most sociable of people. They're certainly able to live what appears to be a normal existence and function in society, such as have a job, etc. But beyond that, they tend to keep themselves to themselves. Dennis Reynolds owns a bar, albeit a very quiet and empty one, but a bar is nevertheless the most sociable workplace you could possibly choose to put yourself in. You could argue that this is a moot point due to the fact that Paddy's pub is almost always empty. But in that case it begs the question, why does Dennis constantly try so hard to bring in customers and make it busy? And on the occasions where the gang's plans succeed in bringing in new customers, it never has any negative effect on Dennis at all.
Dayman, lighter of the night, man. Oh, champion of the sun.
Yay!
Oh, you're a master of karate and friendship for everyone.
And ultimately, the reason they always fail is an indirect consequence of the gang's inability to work together and put their egos aside, not as a case of sabotage on Dennis's part. Were it not for the fact that Dennis's very wealthy father, Frank Reynolds, decides to buy the pub at the start of Season 2, Paddy's pub would have almost certainly shut down within less than a year of opening. But even if we ignore all of that, you then have to take into account the fact that Dennis is not the sole owner, but a joint owner of Paddy's pub, along with Mac and Charlie, his best friends since high school, and eventually his degenerate nihilist father, Frank Reynolds, and their only employee is his twin sister Dee. As far as we can tell, all five of them spend every single day together at the bar from morning until night. They are also incapable of doing anything outside of work on their own, either because they need the others to help or come along, or because the others will choose to inject themselves into each other's personal lives, even if doing so goes against the expressed wishes of that person. The cherry on the cake is that Dennis shares an apartment with Mac. This means that Dennis has almost zero time to himself, and given how dependent and reliant he and Mac are on each other's existence, it'd be virtually impossible for him to engage in decades of successful serial killing without getting caught. As we learn in the episode Quarantine, Dennis is an alcoholic, a very high-functioning one, but an alcoholic nonetheless. Whilst it's not unheard of for psychopaths to indulge in drugs or alcohol, it's rare for them to suffer from addictions or dependencies. In 2010, neuroscientist Dr. Joshua Buchholz of Vanderbilt University in Nashville ran a series of tests and studies that ultimately found that excessive use of recreational drugs and alcohol within psychopaths tended to exacerbate the individual's psychopathic tendencies, whereas in Dennis's case, alcohol is necessary for him to be able to simply function and feel normal throughout his daily life. In fact, throughout the entire show, he is very rarely in a state of what you would call drunkardness. This is also true for the other four characters who are also high-functioning alcoholics. Therefore, it's fair to assume that whatever effect drinking has on Dennis, it certainly doesn't increase any psychopathic inclinations or instincts he may apparently have. Another very common trait of serial killers, at least one who intends to be prolific and successful, that Dennis is severely lacking, is keeping a very low profile, and trying to be as unassuming and forgettable as possible. Not only does Dennis fail to do this, but he doesn't even try. In fact, a great deal of his time he conducts himself in a way that is guaranteed to draw the most amount of unwanted and unnecessary attention to him. The last thing you should ever expect a serial killer to do is to imitate a police officer and repeatedly incur the wrath of a high-profile lawyer. Once It's Always fans started discussing the idea that there was something very sinister and mysterious about the Dennis Reynolds character, the writers of the show very cleverly played off on that and stoked the fires of this idea. Every few episodes they would reveal a very obvious and unsubtle aspect about Dennis that was designed to play up to this theory without ever actually confirming it. In the episode Charlie's Mum Has Cancer, it's established at the beginning that Dennis has suddenly become incapable of feeling emotion. This becomes a concern for Mac, who tries everything he can to help reignite Dennis's ability to feel things, unfortunately to no avail. But if Dennis were a psychopath, he would never have been able to feel emotions at all in the first place. The The fact is, he's only just bringing this up because it's only something that just recently started happening to him. And the fact that he's so willing to openly confess this to the rest of the gang, something a self-aware psychopath and or serial killer would never do, is indicative of someone who is more likely to be experiencing feelings of depression, sadness and loneliness. And by the end of the episode, Dennis quickly rediscovers his ability to feel when he and the gang dig up his mother's grave, after Frank tells them that she isn't dead and her coffin is full of money. Upon opening her casket, Frank reveals he was lying the whole time, and the sight of their mother's rotting corpse causes Dennis to break down in tears. In the episode of the high school reunion, upon realising that he is nowhere near as popular or idolised by his former classmates as he believed himself to be, Dennis snaps into a fit of rage. He then storms out of the building and goes to the car park where the rest of the gang happen to already be hanging out. After opening the boot of his car and rummaging around, he emerges with what he very matter-of-factly refers to as his tools.
Tools! Tools! Duct tape, zip ties, and gloves! I have to have my tools!
All of these events seemingly support the serial killer theory, and they would do were it not for one glaring detail. He does all of this right in front of the gang, in full view, fully aware of their presence. If Dennis were in fact a serial killer and had successfully managed to go undetected by his best friends and family for so long, he could only have done so by being so extremely vigilant and careful not to accidentally give them a reason to be suspicious of him. Whilst it's not unusual for serial killers to ultimately make mistakes, the idea that Dennis would make one so incredibly stupid and simplistic as getting his murdering tools out in front of everyone is very unlikely. When questioned as to why he has these items in his car, rather than stuttering and struggling to come up with an explanation, he immediately answers and says,
Fetish shit! I like to bind, I like to be bound! I'm not...
Now, it's possible that this is just a lie that Dennis has prepared to use in advance should he ever need to explain himself. But considering there is no evidence of Dennis ever kidnapping or murdering anyone, but there's lots of evidence and proof of him frequently engaging in kinky sadomasochistic sexual behaviour, the odds are is that he's actually telling the truth. I don't want to bore you by going through every single example of Dennis's psychopathic behaviour, so instead I'll just finish by addressing what is considered by many fans to be the scene that offers the true glimpse into Dennis's murderous mind. From Season 10, Episode 3.
I swear you would be of more use to me if I skinned you and turned your skin into a lampshade. Or fashioned you into a piece of high-end luggage. I can even add you to my collection.
Are you saying that you have a collection of skin luggage?
Of course I'm not, Dee. Don't be ridiculous. Think of the smell. You haven't thought of the smell, you bitch! Now you say another word and I swear to God I will dice you into a million little pieces. And put those pieces in a box. A glass box. That I will display on my mantle.
The idea of Dennis making a lampshade or a set of luggage out of human skin is actually sandwiched between two other scenes, one that occurs in a prior season and one that occurs in the following season, in which Dennis also talks about skin. In Season 9, Episode 5, Dennis and Mac break up. Mac and Dennis decide that they are too dependent on each other and need to spend more time apart. They quickly realise how much they rely on each other in this scene in which Dennis tries to eat an apple.
Oh, do me a favor. Peel this apple for me, please.
No! No, I'm not gonna peel an apple for you!
But Mac always does it for me.
Why does Mac peel your apples for you?
He doesn't like for me to eat the apples with the skin on it. He says the skin's loaded with toxins.
Okay, well, good news. Mac's not here.
Well, I know he's not here, and that's why I need you to do it for me, please, please.
Oh, Jesus. Just eat it with the skin
I
on
do
it.
not like it with the skin, Dee. I'm not allowed to eat it with the skin. I'm not allowed!
Oh, my God. All right. If you just shut up, I will peel the apple for you the way that Mac likes you to eat it. Give it to me. Give it to me! I'll do it the way that Mac insists. Okay?
Yeah.
The repetition of the word skin, coupled with the level of discomfort that Dennis associates with it, isn't a coincidence. It's done on purpose in order to plant the seed of the bizarre fascination that Dennis has with skin in general. However, it also undermines the possibility that Dennis has ever skinned another human being, let alone turned them into a set of luggage. How could a man who has the ability and the nature to not only kill someone, but then remove their skin and start making furniture out of them, be incapable of peeling an apple on his own? But, you may ask, if he doesn't have any experience removing and working with human skin, How come he speaks with such certainty regarding...
You haven't thought of the smell, you bitch!
That question is answered in the following season, season 11, episode 2, Frank Falls Out of a Window, when we learn that Dennis wants to become a veterinarian. Then, whilst in conversation with Dee, it's revealed...
The veterinarian thing.
Yeah.
I feel like the only reason you wanted to be a vet was to keep the skins.
What?
You want to keep the skins, don't you?
There's no denying the skins are fascinating. It's the most fascinating part of the animal. The skin of any animal is the most fascinating part.
So clearly, in the past, Dennis has shown some fascination or interest with animal skin, to the point that Dee not only knows about it, but Dennis knows that she knows about it, and is completely comfortable with it. We never learn exactly what form his interest in skins took, because he quickly gets very angry and distracted when Dee suggests that he's going bald.
Also, you're going bald.
I'm going bald? What are you talking about?
In the interest of being real.
Where in the hell am I possibly going bald?
In the back of your head.
There's no evidence of that.
There's
No,
quite a bit.
But it's probably reasonable to assume that whatever he did, one thing he learned about working with skin is that eventually it starts to smell. And if that's true of animal skin, it would almost certainly be true of human skin. Now, whilst it's true that most serial killers start out by killing and torturing animals, this is not a behaviour that is continued once they eventually move on to doing it with humans. If Dennis Reynolds is a serial killer, and that explains why in his youth he developed a fascination with collecting animal skins, then why would he still want to pursue a career as a vet for that express purpose? He wouldn't. If that's not enough, consider the fact that Dennis's threat to murder Dee and remove her skin and turn it into furniture was delivered whilst he was sat in an office of and directly in front of a professional psychologist who saw and heard the whole thing. Unless Dennis was deliberately trying to get caught because he wanted to be stopped from killing anymore, there is no reason for him to do something so reckless other than he isn't a serial killer. He's either just a very stable but very weird and cruel person, aka an arsehole, or at best bet he's possibly suffering from some kind of borderline personality disorder, which would make sense because that is exactly the type of medication that the psychologist ends up giving him in the next scene. Now, before any of you think that I'm just being a massive killjoy here, let me finish by explaining the very twisted and beautiful punchline of the whole Dennis Reynolds is a serial killer theory. Dennis Reynolds is a total loser. He's a monumental failure who has no justifiable reason to be as arrogant and as cocky as he is. He is a delusional, immature man-child who is too self-absorbed to ever be able to connect with another human being on any meaningful level. The only way he can ever make people like him for any degree of time is by pretending that he's much more interesting, deep and complex than he really is. And whilst this charade may work initially, it doesn't last very long. However, in what may be the most brilliant example ever of meta-irony, there are people who do genuinely believe that Dennis Reynolds is much more interesting, deep and complex than he really is. There are people who don't think that he's nothing more than a sad, pathetic loser with delusions of grandeur. And those are the people who are watching the show who have convinced themselves that Dennis is a serial killer. My name is Dick Coughlin, and all of you had better like and share this video. You know.
Because of the implication.